Hey everyone, welcome back to the Watson Blocks podcast. The show is brought to you by Giga Energy, a leading electrical manufacturer focused on Bitcoin mining. And before we get too far into the intro today, I wanted to ask for a huge favor. If you guys have not subscribed to the show or given us a rating and review, if you could please go do that now, that would be hugely helpful. Also, go check out our brand new YouTube channel. Or if you're already watching on YouTube, please go subscribe to the channel, where you can now watch all of these conversations as well as see some of the new content that we're going to be releasing soon. This week on the show, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Casey Martinez, the founder and CEO of Clean Incentive. This was an absolute blast for me because I got to learn a ton on this episode. I really, truly did not have a lot of understanding about renewable energy credits or RECs. I didn't know how they functioned, what the purpose they served, why was there a secondary market for these things. We go from that, we get into another super interesting topic of how the traditional data center industry actually went through the same type of smear campaigns that the Bitcoin mining industry is currently getting as it relates to its energy use, and what did they do to get out from underneath all of that. We wrap up by talking about the work that Casey is doing at Clean Incentive and how they're using the blockchain technology to verify energy sources. Like I said at the top, this is an absolute blast of a conversation for me, because I got to walk away with a ton of new information and knowledge. My hope is that you guys get the same. With that, please enjoy this discussion with Casey Martinez. This show is brought to you by Foreman, the official miner management software of the Watson Blocks podcast. Foreman is the leader in Bitcoin miner management software. Guys, this software suite is absolutely incredible. Not only can you automate your curtailment program and cost avoidance, which, yes, those are two different strategies, but you can also manage all of your inventory from one clean dashboard. Whether you're trying to avoid peaks or executing a block strategy or needing to manage 3 to infinity miners, Foreman can handle all of this for you. They are the software stack that will scale up with your operation as you continue to add more megawatts and complexity to your power strategy. Seriously, guys, the best way to get a full understanding of the capabilities of Foreman is to head over to their website right now, sign up today, because it's free up to 25 miners. Seriously, you didn't hear that wrong. It's absolutely free up to 25 miners. Go get signed up today and get started managing your miner fleet like the pros today at foreman.mn. That's FOREMAN.MN. Foreman.mn. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I am sitting down with Casey Martinez, the founder and CEO of Clean Incentive. Casey, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to see you, Ben.
Yeah, good to see you too. And it'll be funny for the audience to hear, but you and I actually bumped into each other at the Texas Blockchain Council event back in Fort Worth. Or not back in Fort Worth. It was back a while ago in Fort Worth. That's what I meant to say. That sounds a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to start with, how was that event for you? And what'd you think of that?
It was great. A lot of political speakers, with the presidential candidates there. I thought that was interesting. Most Bitcoin events are very technical or very focused on the industry, and this was a bit higher level from a political perspective. I thought the Bitcoin mining stage was great, and energy and grid impact was high on the topic, high on the list of topics that were being discussed. So for me, it was a great event.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of good networking too. Just again, Texas Blockchain Council, They are, they're kind of in the mecca of mining down in Texas on the ERCOT grid system. So it was not a huge surprise that there was such a strong mining presence there. So I'm sure that was pretty good networking for you and your team.
Yeah, it was one of the best events of the year that I attended. Yeah, so good to see all the personalities show up, not just miners, but other thought leaders in the space,
and literal presidential candidates.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. Well, Casey, the way that I usually start the podcast episodes off is I really like to hear people's backgrounds. I think it's helpful just to hear, the level of expertise and just like history you have on a lot of the stuff that we'll end up talking about today. So I'd love to have you kind of walk us through your background, what you had been working on, and then obviously ending with Clean Incentive and what you guys are doing now. Um,
Mhm.
and if you can, it's that the several things in here is tie in like how did you stumble into Bitcoin mining at all? Because it's very niche, especially I think would be fun to hear how that ties into your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas, sort of born and raised, grew up near Amarillo, in the windy part of the state. Went to school near Austin, studied science, and moved to Austin and enjoyed some live music and had a lot of fun. Still involved, or was involved early in clean energy. So I was doing material science at a solar panel manufacturing facility. It was a lot of fun. It was actually at that company when was working with a friend back in 2011 who first told me about Bitcoin.
Oh
And
wow!
he actually said, let's go on eBay and buy these GPUs and put together a Bitcoin mining rig. And,
Oh cool.
I had a, libertarian sort of permaculture like phase there where I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. Um, I decided ultimately to buy gold and silver at the time, which turned out to be a bad decision because I sold that 10 years later for about the exact same price as I bought it. Um, and I missed out at mining Bitcoin at, $2 or $3 a piece. It's pretty amazing. But uh, I don't feel too bad about it because the buddy who did ultimately mine Bitcoin back in 2011 lost his keys, and so he was kind of sad about that. But
Oh no!
um,
Oh, oh no!
um, I met my wife in Austin, moved to Houston thereafter, started a family, began working on the operational side of renewable energy, so developers and owner operators. So for your audience, there's quite a bit of work that goes into siting and permitting and procurement and building of these wind and solar farms. And then um, over time, these companies began operating them themselves. And sometimes that means power trading, on the merchant
Yeah,
wholesale markets. So at that point, somewhere in there, I pivoted from engineering work to data science work. And I led a data science team for a number of years, solely focused on performance analytics of the wind and solar farms. But it was in 2020 when I began to um, understand Bitcoin mining a little bit more, or just hear about it. And I heard about it in the context of um, we had wind farms that were curtailed, and we had really negatively priced power in West Texas. And I
yeah,
and I learned about for the first time that there were data centers actually out there um, supporting renewable projects. So I had a lens of looking at this Bitcoin mining through the perspective of a renewable energy owner operator. And so I was like, wow, that's great because there's no one buying power out there in the middle of nowhere. And so I didn't know this was even possible. And so, you know, I did a deep dive into everything I could about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, kind of got up to speed on the digital asset and the money use case, but literally had no exposure to the mining aspects of Bitcoin at that time.
sure.
And so about that point, I was really interested. It's like, well, how can I buy a Bitcoin that was produced with this clean energy out here in West Texas? And I began to understand that it's nearly impossible to trace Bitcoin back through the exchanges and through the pools to the actual miner and the actual data source, or I'm sorry, energy source
Yeah,
that was running the miner. And so I used I began to think about and apply how that problem was solved in the electricity power market, because electricity you also really can't trace back to the generator. It's just this sustained frequency and voltage
yeah.
on a
They're
shared network.
electrons. Yeah,
And so it's very similar in its properties. And what was done back in 2008 or so was the idea of certifying green power from a certain generator, and trading that certificate sort of independent of the power. So you then could you could claim the use of clean energy or wind energy just by owning these certificates to match the megawatt hours that you actually consume at your home, even if the power at your home came from a coal plant sort of maybe next door to your house. So this
Yeah.
idea of an attribute certificate, as it's called, that could be traded independent of the power market sort of sparked me to have this idea that the same sort of attribute certificate could apply to Bitcoin. So I started this business sort of moonlighting with my day job for a few months, and then decided to take the plunge and scale up this business, because I think it really can do two things for the world. It can connect investors who have carbon emission concerns about Bitcoin to data centers that use clean energy, and it can also send a market signal and incentives to Bitcoin miners to use more clean energy. And and what that does is it really benefits the grid operators, it really benefits the renewable developers, and it benefits Bitcoin, because now you're getting, the network is getting access to these institutional investors who most likely, just like everybody else, doesn't have a true understanding of the carbon impact of the network, of the Bitcoin
Yeah.
network, and are not get really allowed to invest in Bitcoin because of these sort of carbon issues.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
just
a that's a
like
full journey.
yeah, like company mandates that don't allow them to buy. Yeah. Um
Yeah.
well, so I appreciate that a ton, because 2011 with GPUs, and then you had almost a 10-year gap there. Um did you reach out to your buddy from 2011 when
I
you first
did.
were
I
like hearing
did.
about data set? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when you found out he lost his keys.
Yeah, that was. Which I guess made me feel better. It would have been worse if he was, a millionaire or something. But
Yeah, he's on his own private island when you call him.
yeah, but he was, he's a sharp guy. He was a research scientist, and he saw really early on that that Bitcoin was going to be a success.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I I find it interesting that you were coming from the renewable space,
Hmm.
and maybe what it really is, Casey, maybe it's a symptom of the narrative hadn't quite gotten out that Bitcoin is this like big electric consumer, or kind of this, this dirty thing because it uses more power, or it's, going to use more power than the world. How were you able to kind of push past whatever narratives were out there to really get into like, okay, maybe this is something I need to pay a little bit more attention to and look
Yeah.
into more? Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't easy in terms of, I think all of our generation and previous generations were always taught that energy efficiency and conservation was what you can do to benefit the planet and benefit, to contribute to sustainability, recycling, things like that. And it wasn't intuitive that consumption of power was a net positive. And so I think that is the main sticking point, and it's not easy for most laymen to really understand that that consuming power can have benefits to the grid. Now, I will say that where that power and when that power is consumed matters, and that's the whole reason I created this company, is to incentivize more of the activity that is more beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, I think I think this idea of how so Troy Cross has a few great analogies about how to think about this, and one of my favorite ones is this idea of a bakery and a baker who has a surplus amount of bread, at the end of each day or something, and it's like a wasted, bread goes stale or something, right? And so if you can have a buyer of that bread at the end of each day, it benefits the baker. And if, the baker has an event or has like some increased demand and sells all that, then anyway. So this idea of a flexible buyer and a buyer of last resort, as it's called, um, I think was so powerful and so counterintuitive, because most people don't understand the power market. So they
That's right.
understand consuming his
Yeah.
electricity is bad,
Yeah.
because I'm in a city and I pay power prices and I don't want to pay higher prices. But most people don't understand the really the fluctuations of the power price around the grid. Um, but the other thing was that, the data centers of the past decade, the Google, Microsoft type data centers, you know, the way that they overcame the same stigmas that Bitcoin mining is overcoming
Oh,
now
yeah.
was through just buying a lot of renewable energy procurement. And so just having a lot of PPAs and using these REC certificates that I described. Now, Bitcoin miners don't have the finances to pay for these large power contracts and PPAs, but they do have something that traditional data centers can't do, which is to go operate in the middle of nowhere and be interrupted in a moment's notice. So it's good. It's taking, I think, the sustainability world and traditional energy companies a little bit of time to wrap their heads around this different type of data center. But I can tell you firsthand that the energy company I was with is doing pilots of Bitcoin mining behind the meter at wind farms. And
Oh, wow.
from anecdotes I've heard is that almost every energy company, in the US is also piloting or have these innovation teams that are studying Bitcoin mining. So it's definitely going to be one of those situations where it's sort of slow and then all at once sort of
And then
thing because,
suddenly, yeah.
yeah, because they don't really care about Bitcoin as an asset. And they know that they can sell it, convert it to dollars, instantaneously. So they just view it um, as a buyer right there behind the fence or behind the meter or just
Yeah.
nearby their generators as like a hedge against lower power prices.
Wow.
And the way
Yeah.
these RFPs have gone out from these energy companies and the way the large, well-established Bitcoin miners are responding to those RFPs is speaking the same language. It's like we'll do a floor price, we'll do adders on the merchant power price, and I think they're really speaking the same language, and eventually they're going to get to bed, go to bed together here, and you're going to see a really fascinating marriage between energy companies, renewable developers, and Bitcoin miners.
Yeah, that's the marriage I'm here for, Casey. That's it's like the the whole foundation of the podcast. Ah, that's super exciting. I really 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 like that bread baker analogy with, because you're right, it does point to how not intuitive the electrical market is. People think if you're using the electricity, that's the waste, when it's like, well, no, no, no. Actually, it's actually going to go to waste if we don't use it for something. So you might as well put it into
Yeah,
something with a value. Um, yeah, and then I'd love to go maybe a little bit deeper on your comment about like how the Googles and the Amazons figured this thing out, because you touched on something that I'm super interested in, is like, how is Google, Amazon, Microsoft, you keep going through the traditional data center industry, how have they escaped this bad narrative? Because they've got very public roadmaps to growing at a gigawatt per year, so it's
yeah.
like, you touched on it a second, but could you go a little bit deeper on like what you
Well,
think they're doing?
absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. So, I mean, they had very similar blowback from Greenpeace and
Oh,
World Wildlife Institute, and there was a number of NGOs that
I didn't
were,
know that.
I don't know if they're picketing, but they were definitely writing the type of hit pieces that you see in Bitcoin. Um,
I didn't know that.
I don't know if they were, I don't know if they were saying they're going to boil the oceans, but there was definitely an image problem that they were trying to
Yeah.
manage. And you have to understand the time. Cloud computing really wasn't understood. Before cloud computing, everybody was just running servers in their basement, in the at their business. And so this idea of a gigawatt data center just didn't exist until that. So um, there was blowback, but really also what coincided with this is the greenhouse gas protocol was established, and it created
Mm.
a guidance for how procuring renewable energy and purchasing RECs would allow you to report your emissions. So that framework came out about the same time, and then all of a sudden you had not quite a hockey stick, but you had a huge expansion in the amount of corporate PPAs. So corporate procurement of renewable energy and these power purchase agreements just exploded. And now the world's largest buyers of renewable energy is AWS, Microsoft, and Google. Um,
Oh,
and so I mean, they're not necessarily the largest users of electricity in the world. You have manufacturing and you have other sectors
yeah.
of the economy, um, but they were able to really spend a lot of money on renewable PPAs and really change the narrative quite a bit. What ended up happening was that these renewable PPAs were not just for marketing and like PR. It turned out that these are long-term hedges, and these long-term contracts ended up being just as cost effective as if you were buying a power contract with the utility for brown power or any other like hedging strategy. So they ended up getting sort of this 2-for-1 benefit where they were hedging low power prices 15, 20 years. They
Yeah.
were able to report low carbon emissions. And now they turned it around from being like yelled at by Greenpeace to now being the champions of sustainability, as you see today in a lot of their marketing.
So,
But now it's changing with AI. But
yeah, yeah,
please
yeah.
ask your question.
I was going to say, I'd like to actually just pull on that thread a little bit more. Like, what does it look like for the Bitcoin mining industry to maybe hit that same hockey stick curve, or is it clean incentive? I
Yeah,
mean, is it the work you guys are doing? Like, kind of walk me through, like, what do you
right.
think that's gonna, like? Where's the pendulum start to swing?
Well, so just to back up a second, when I said that these cloud data center operators were buying renewable energy, I want to make it
Yeah.
very clear that it wasn't physical delivery. It's not like they
Ah,
were co-locating their data centers with
I
a
was
giant
curious
solar
about the
farm.
uptime. Yeah.
I think this is important because it sets the stage and creates the problem that Bitcoin is now addressing, which is when Amazon buys gigawatts of renewable power, that power is in California, West Texas, and the Great Plains, where all the resources, even though they're data centers, are where the
Are in
population
Iowa.
lives. Uh, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's on the East Coast, the Northwest, and where all these data centers are. So you have this mismatch. You have this power consumption and power delivery that
Hmm.
has these transmission constraints and all the logistics of the power grid. So what they created in some ways are these pockets of negatively priced power or curtailment because of transmission constraints. So that sort of segues into this idea that created the power market opportunity for Bitcoin data centers to go in there and consume that really low priced power to run the network and support the network.
Sure.
Um,
Just to make sure I followed and tracked that. So what you're saying is like an AWS data center in, let's just call it like Oregon, is procuring and buying the power from West Texas, but that power isn't actually physically getting delivered out to that data center. Is that, like, am I understanding how that?
yeah, more or less,
Okay.
that's correct. I mean, they try to source renewables to where their data centers are, but there's always a certain amount of transmission lines involved, and there's
Yeah.
always a bit of a mismatch. And so, um, and and right now there is no strong incentive for data centers to move out in the middle of nowhere where that power is produced because they have other latency and other like considerations when they
Yeah.
develop data centers. But there's also not a strong incentive for renewable developers to develop solar and wind farms really close to the population centers uh, because that's more expensive land and the permitting is more difficult. So there's a number of reasons why all the renewables are being developed where they are,
Yeah.
and all the cloud data centers are being developed where they are. Um, and I hinted at that earlier is that the Bitcoin data centers have the flexibility both in location and in sort of demand response to do things that the cloud data centers never could.
Sure. Okay. So I think, again, I'm just gonna. This is like a Ben checking if I heard this right. So while they may be actually getting physical delivery of the power, it's creating so much congestion on the transmission lines that it's creating other pockets of excess power. Is that maybe more so what you meant then?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You have overdevelopment of renewables in certain geographies that the grid can't really handle.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of demand for new renewable energy, but there's only so many places where it's getting built today. And so, yeah, anyway, it's created a little bit of an imbalance. And so that imbalance is being solved right now with batteries and with Bitcoin data centers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Casey. You're going to hear probably a few more like elementary questions, especially when when we get into like what are renewable energy credits and that sort of thing. So before we go there, I want you to kind of walk us through like what is the maybe the physical mechanism or so you know clean incentive you guys are creating this token to attach to the energy source for Bitcoin miners. Maybe walk us through like how that all happens,
Okay.
or maybe correct how I just explained that, but maybe kind of walk us through that and let's kind of go there next.
Sure. Yeah. So as I said in my sort of my background, we're we want to apply the model that was successful um, that allowed environmental attributes to get traded in the power market using REX to something that works for Bitcoin. And frankly, it can work for other commodities. So we're not really a Bitcoin focused company. We
Oh,
plan to
sure.
certify other commodities as well. But if you look at the REC market, what happens is you have a grid operator that certifies the generation of a renewable energy generator. It says at the end of the month, whatever it is, 100,000 megawatt hours was produced. And so it issues these certificates that are then listed for sale and can then be bought and sold by corporations. And then the owner operator of that renewable site is who gets paid the funds from the sale of those certificates.
Sure.
So really what we're doing is we're doing the same thing with Bitcoin miners. We go and we audit the data center and validate their energy sources. So that usually means meter data and electricity statements and things like that. And then we put that all together into a sustainability report, and that's inscribed on the Bitcoin network as an ordinal.
Mm,
And for all of the Bitcoin produced during that audit period, um, we produce these Bitcoin emission certificates that are one to one with the Bitcoin produced. And so those are the certificates that are listed for sale to be purchased by investors. And then the revenue and the sales of that goes to the Bitcoin miner. So
okay.
it's really just taking the same template from the Rex and applying it to Bitcoin. But what we're trying to do is leverage the transparency and the immutability of the blockchain to provide a level of governance that we don't have as not being a government agency or
Yeah.
a multinational nonprofit or anything. So users and holders of these certificates don't have to trust Clean Incentive that we've done everything correctly. You can see and verify everything on chain. We live by this ethos of don't trust, verify.
Yeah.
So the properties of the most decentralized public blockchain are there, sort of underpinning the value of these certificates.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. This show is powered by Giga Energy. Giga Energy is a vertically integrated Bitcoin mining company that manufactures all of the electrical infrastructure needed to start mining Bitcoin. Whether that's medium voltage switchgear, PDUs, or power cables for your miners, the team at Giga Energy has you covered. Reach out to their sales team today for all of your electrical infrastructure needs at sales@gigaenergy.com. Use the word hash rate for the subject of the email and you'll get 5% off your order. All right, now back to the show. So I appreciate that. And I think, well, you tell me, this is like one thing that I have heard about the Rex is that there is a problem with double spend, or maybe it's not double spend, but isn't there a way that you can, I don't know if it's use or sell, or I swear I heard once that there is like some challenge of verifying that the holder of a rec may have already gotten rid of it. Is that making any sense? Is that
Yeah, so there's this concept of retirement. So you have to
thank you.
retire a
That's what it
rec.
is. Yeah.
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 So you have to retire a rec in order to use it in your carbon accounting. And you're right that there are brokers and there's other companies that will hold recs just to sell them elsewhere. Uh, but at least the rec market is much more credible and doesn't have the same sort of problems as what you may be hearing from the voluntary carbon offset market, where
Mm,
the projects aren't really verifiable or no one really knows if the trees planted are still there or what the carbon savings are. So I want to clearly differentiate sort of what's going on with carbon offsets from what's happening in the power market with these RECs. Um, so it doesn't suffer from the same problems as
okay.
the carbon market, but um, there's definitely some sort of edge cases that you can point to in the power market where, um, because of tax credits and because of REC revenue, it makes sense to operate a wind farm even though the price is negative.
Sure.
It's common in West Texas for some wind farms to operate all the way down to $20, $30 a megawatt hour,
Negative.
like negative
Yeah.
price,
Yeah.
because it's still, when they sell tax credits and RECs, it's still profitable for them. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense. The market is telling them that there's no place for that power. So really they should shut down. So you could argue that would be um, a market signal that would be not efficient. That is something that is maybe skewing the market, you could
Yeah.
say, which I think benefits miners because it produces more negatively priced power. But yeah, so it's not perfect by any means. Um, but renewable generation is produced. So at the fundamental level, the REC still match the megawatt hours produced, even if
Yeah.
it shouldn't be produced.
Yeah. And I guess I kind of stumbled into asking that question because your company really helped solve like that piece on the retirement of this. Is it's all right there. It's, you can go verify this. And I think that's going to be a huge advancement in how, potentially even how the RECs work and
That's right.
function. Yeah.
That's right. If the REC market had the transparency of the blockchain, you really wouldn't need the brokerage market at all, you could
Yeah.
argue. And when we expand our platform to other commodities, we fully think that the the platform will be so easy to use that you don't really need a whole industry of brokers that really don't really add value to the developers of the project.
Yeah.
Um,
So I mentioned, before we hit record that I don't know a whole lot about RECs, renewable energy credits. And I think when I'm hearing you kind of explain things, I think where my lack of understanding is more around like the market that I mean, it exists. I mean, there's a very robust market for renewable energy credits. I think my lack of understanding is around the market that has been built up around that. Why is there a secondary market? I'm going to start with like the most, like I'm a 5-year-old kind of a question. Like, why is there a market for those?
for Rex in general
Yeah.
or for Bitcoin? Okay.
No, no, like starting with the Rex, because like I see a very clear, path to why there's a need for these for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has this narrative that it's using
Right.
coal and it's going to boil the oceans. And you're saying, well, no, here is a verifiable way to say that these
Right.
Bitcoin mining companies are producing with. So anyway, but the
Right.
Rex, I'm like, what? Why?
Right. Well, I maybe alluded to it earlier in that, if you were a if you were AWS back in 2008, you could have just purchased a forward contract for power from TXU, some utility, and the lowest price utility, and it would most
Yep.
likely most likely be natural gas and coal. And the reason they would want to spend extra for a renewable energy PPA is to solve that problem that they had earlier about their energy narrative or their carbon narrative. The greenhouse gas protocol sort of operationalized that so that they could do their carbon accounting properly. So that was the fundamental reason why there is market demand for RECs today. Is people just want to, or corporations mostly, with the ever increasing trend for carbon accounting reporting, they need to show that they are addressing the indirect emissions from the power they consume. And
Do you
RECs
mind
is
if
just the
I?
market.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but so even even though that data center won't be consuming physically using the energy that's attached to the rec,
Yeah,
that still has value to or helped kind of, pun intended, clean up the narrative around. So even though they're not physically using it, it's still, they were still able to turn that into a market. Interesting.
that's right. That's right.
Hmm.
And and it's a thriving market now, even on the secondary, the brokers. You can go to S&P Global or Expansive or any other and buy RECs from who knows where, to offset, the power that you consume making this podcast. And you could report that, and
Yeah.
everybody would be happy with the way that is. Now, I will say there are trends in the power market that say that not every megawatt hour is the same, and that we should start to. There's two dominant trends. One is you should match the hourly consumption with hourly generation that is deliverable, to try to sort of address this deliverability issue,
Yeah.
that no longer can you have a business on the West Coast and buy, a generation on the East Coast. Um, or the framework that we are building in, which is a carbon matching framework that says it doesn't matter if the power is deliverable. What matters is what is the induced emissions from the electricity you did consume, and what is the avoided emissions from the electricity that's generated at that time and at those locations on the grid. So if your wind farm that you purchased power from or RECs from is in the middle of nowhere, West Texas, and it's curtailed most of the time and has very low prices, it's not really making a meaningful impact on grid emissions, because you still need gas peaker plants to manage and balance
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
grid in Texas or elsewhere. Um, and so anyway, I don't want to say that this is a static conversation. There's definitely some nuances and some trends that are trying to make the REC process and the Scope 2 guidance and the greenhouse gas protocol
Sure.
better. But that's sort of this has been the system for a long time. But I think you were alluding to it also, that Bitcoin could benefit quite a bit from sort of overlaying this scheme on
Absolutely.
top of the Bitcoin, because we're not really messing with the Bitcoin network directly. We're not really messing with the fungibility of Bitcoin. We're really just giving a pass to institutional investors who have this carbon concern, or maybe they don't have the carbon concern, but they have a reporting requirement, that says that you need to allocate, you need to report on the carbon emissions of Bitcoin if you plan to add it to your pension fund or
Yeah.
endowment, and they don't really know how to do that. So we're giving them a
Yeah.
pass, to start allocating.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin O'Leary, and he's been a little bit quiet in the bear market here, but Kevin O'Leary,
Post FTX, yeah.
oh my gosh, he was, I mean, I think he went on a rampage. It was like, I swear I heard multiple times a week, every week for like months straight, where he'd get up and talk about how just geysers of capital are going to enter Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin if they can just prove that it's green and clean. And he would always talk about his mandates for his I don't know if it's a holding company or what he technically operates, but that was the narrative before the bear market was Bitcoin,
Yeah.
show your how green your production is, and that will open the floodgates. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that this has been addressed in Bitcoin and the way he's addressing it is he's just building data centers and selling the Bitcoin that they earned directly to investors, or just do project finance where the institutions somehow buy into the project directly. So it's like their exposure to Bitcoin without actually touching the
Yeah.
asset,
Yeah.
you know. But the public mining stocks, if you've noticed, have been a proxy for this ESG compliant Bitcoin exposure, because if many of them, if not all of them, tout the sustainability of their energy that they're using, right? The Iris, the Hut 8, the Hive, and
Griffin.
Marathon to
Yeah.
yeah. So, um, but the problem with mining stock is it's not a good proxy for Bitcoin. And if you look at the reporting of Bitcoin miners, they don't really tell you much detail about the energy source or the carbon emissions either. So I do believe Kevin O'Leary when he says that there is some pent up demand um, for Bitcoin that can prove what the carbon emissions are. And so, because there's not a good solution to this problem right now. No, there are ETFs right now buying carbon credits to try to offset the carbon emissions. There's one out of Frankfurt, Germany that does this.
Hmm.
Some people are buying RECs to offset what they think the carbon or the power consumption is of Bitcoin mining. But no one is really doing the bottoms up auditing that we're doing at Clean Incentive, which is um, this data center for this period of time was audited. This is the carbon emissions. This is how much Bitcoin was earned. And so um, we're trying to fundamentally provide something that's bulletproof to these institutions, because there's already a lot of confusion about Bitcoin if you're an endowment fund manager
Right.
or pension fund. So
Yeah.
we're trying to remove as many of these hurdles as we can, and hopefully in the process push more miners to use clean energy.
Yeah. Talk to me about the reception. You kind of touched on, I mean, my God, you ask some of these people to self-custody and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, let's not get carried away. So, I mean, even just like from that starting point, like how are the conversations going, and how is this being received? Maybe from like both angles, like the complexity of it all. And then like also, I'm sure it goes without saying people are excited about proof that Bitcoin, some Bitcoin is generated with clean energy.
Yeah, I mean, because just like me, they actually want to own that Bitcoin. They want to actually contribute to the part of the industry that they want to encourage. And so there is a bit of a sort of impact investing, or just some empowerment for them to be a part of Bitcoin and more than just holding the asset, right? But to your point, there's still a lot of education on the institutional side for them to understand how this works. But we've had a lot of great conversations with exchanges to create the clean Bitcoin listings that are backed, but where all the Bitcoin is backed by our certificates. So you actually give retail investors and other investors sort of two options to purchase:
Sure.
conventional Bitcoin listing, and then one with the green premium, one that's a little bit higher price, but that has the certificates to back it up. Um, the ETFs are also, I think, going to be a really important part.
Yeah.
So we are talking with a few of those to partner with us to back their ETFs with our certificates as well.
Oh, do we get to say on the show, Casey, that there's an ETF launching in January? Do we get to announce? Sorry,
with Clean
continue.
Incentive, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, but it's been good. It's been good. Retail folks traditionally aren't, they're not really willing to pay a green premium for Bitcoin or for other digital assets. They will buy fair trade coffee or organic food. Um, and so we're mostly targeting the corporations and the institutional investors.
Yeah.
Um, but so far it's been great. But we're launching this next month in January. And our marketplace will be live, and so you can actually purchase the certificates from our first few miners that are on there.
That's
and
fantastic.
Try it for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. It's like, look, I'm not going to go to XL Energy and say, hey, I'll pay a premium on my rate to have green sourced energy. So it's what you were saying about the retail may not be as interested as the
Mhm.
institutional people who have those mandates to be good stewards of the environment as a part of their
Yeah.
ESG. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course there are retail customers that care about sustainability, but really it's the people that have the pain point of carbon reporting or some sustainability officer that is telling their fund manager, no, they can't invest in Bitcoin. It's melting the polar ice caps, and even though it makes sense from an asset allocation point of view to maybe take half your gold holdings or something and
Yeah.
diversify, um, they're just getting shut down. And so we're trying to enable these fund managers to sort of fight back against these ESG committees and sustainability officers that says, look, there is a way we can do this.
Yeah.
And every company and now Bitcoin has grown, everybody has these advocates for Bitcoin, right? Internal into these organizations that sort of do the battles internally to try to change the narrative, and it's slow. I mean, you saw it at Fidelity first, and now you see it at BlackRock and other places. It takes time, and it usually comes
Yeah.
from the bottom up.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, maybe Casey, to keep a tab on the time. Like I told you, we chew up this hour pretty quick. I would love for you to kind of paint us a picture of the future of like electrical generation, how you and clean incentive fit into that mix, all tied in with like Bitcoin mining. So those are, a few ingredients to throw into like how you're putting this all together. But I'd love to hear what you think the future looks like with kind of all three of those,
Yeah,
in the mix, and what you see that all looking like.
yeah, it's an interesting marriage, like we talked about before. I think what we're seeing now is this buyer of last resort situation that's happening, and our certificates will help accelerate that. But I think the trend that's exciting is that Bitcoin becomes the buyer of first resort that helps project developers actually build renewables in locations where maybe the transmission grid isn't built out yet, and in different geographies. And then once that project is built and sort of monetized and supported by Bitcoin mining, then you could sell, a contract to a corporation or some other off taker to use that power to actually manufacture something. And then what you end up having is this sort of these waves of projects and Bitcoin mining that gets kind of spreads across the country and creates the drive for transmission to get built out. Because that's the main problem right now is that transmission doesn't
Yes.
know where to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
built. Grid operators aren't sure where to go. Some regions are actually declining in population, and some regions
Yeah.
are really exploding in population. So the development of transmission takes 3 to 10 years, and it's a very difficult process. So if Bitcoin can help partner and marry with these renewable developers to build more projects out, um, then I think everybody wins there. And also, if we can tap into this institutional money and investors that see that buying Bitcoin with our certificates or buying Bitcoin and our certificates actually helps create that buyer of last resort and buyer of first resort and just like accelerates that trend.
Yeah.
And then now it's more than just Bitcoin as a store of value and as a medium of exchange. Now it's Bitcoin as an impact investment that is actually doing real work in the grid to help spread renewable energy. So
Yeah.
that's what I saw way back when I first started this company is that renewable energy developers need a buyer like this. And if harnessed correctly, it could be that hero for them. I think long term, it's going to be batteries and long duration battery storage, which will eventually, or maybe fusion or something like that, that'll eventually make the power sector much more balanced and probably not interesting to Bitcoin. And that's where Bitcoin will go to all these off grid or all these developing countries. And, Bitcoin mining is the dung beetle, another Troy Cross reference, but is the dung beetle that will just gather and crawl and scrape all these pockets of stranded energy and seek it out and monetize it and just kind of crawl the entire earth. And who knows, maybe in 100 years they'll just be in volcanoes or on ocean waves, or or all these
Yeah,
places where no people are ever going to live. And then, but in its wake, we have a well-balanced grid that has clean energy generation and really low prices for all the consumers.
I love that. That's again, you're touching on a lot of the things that I personally am excited about with the path and the trajectory of Bitcoin mining specifically, is that this is going to help usher in, you know, expansion of energy, because with energy, civilization gets, better, and just there's so many benefits to
Yeah,
having more energy and energy abundance. So I really appreciate that, Casey. I'd love for you to give the audience a handoff. How can they get in touch with you? Clean Incentive. Point them to wherever you think is best for them to find
sure.
out more info.
Yeah, cleanincentive.com has our page and our white paper describing what we're doing and our plans. Um, the marketplace, like I said, will be live in January, and so people can actually go and kick the tires on some of the data centers that we've audited and see our methodology directly. Um, but we're really excited. We're really excited to expand, and 2024 is going to be a great year. The ETF, the halvening, I think there's going to be so many dynamics that I think will make people understand a little bit more about what Bitcoin is, not just the asset, but the mining side of it as well. So,
Yeah. Thank you. We'll link to everything in the show notes too, so you'll be just a click away for the audience here. Casey, this has been phenomenal. I really appreciate your time. I mean, this is all stuff, it's like I've said a couple of times. I don't know a lot about renewable energy credits and kind of that driving incentive mechanism for expanding energy. You guys are doing that now with the blockchain tech. It's all so exciting. So thank you. I appreciate this immensely.
yeah, thank you, Ben.
All right, take care.